Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? We've seen each other twice this week, Kieran, including a lovely 2.5 hour drive back from Leicester.
2.5 hours for you. I got home at 4 a.m. and I had my granddaughters staying with us. So they hold no truck. It's 6 a.m. It's Grandpa. For Christ's sake, it's time to play Peppa Pig and making dinosaurs and God knows what else. I was a bit bleary.
Although I'm guessing your 3-year-old doesn't go, for Christ's sake, Grandad, it's time for Peppa Pig.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you to all the lovely people in Leicester. It's questions day, Kieran. I've got one for you. How did that terrible sub Katy Perry Swedish song win Eurovision Song Contest? You know people in Liverpool, Kieran. So ask questions. What's going on? Norway should have won that, or Czechia. That's actually only told me off for taking it too seriously, which is a big change in my relationship to Eurovision from years gone by.
Well, yeah, and also, I knew the city of Liverpool would put on a good show because it's a city that knows how to party. And when they said, a Liverpool legend's coming on, I thought, oh right, could it be Sir Paul? Could it be Echo and the Bunnymen? And it turned out to be Sonia.
That'll be you in years to come. People say here's a Liverpool legend opening the Eurovision Song Contest. It's Kieran Maguire. Our first question, Kieran. Oh, by the way, congratulations on the shirt you had on the other night. That was, I felt slightly cruel by pointing out to the audience that it was true you were colourblind, but it was a cracking purple skull outfit. It was really nice, very good.
Skulls and roses. It was Skulls and Roses. A bit of rock and roll hidden into the event.
Well, you are rock and roll, Kieran. Let's start this, but we're 2 minutes in. We haven't talked about football yet. Let's do that. Alex O'Neill has our first question. And Alex says, I'm curious about FFP calculations in the Championship. I'm a Hull City supporter, and recently our owners spoke about us not being able to spend much more due to FFP. However, in the past 2 seasons of published accounts, we've made a net loss of £6 million. Clubs like Middlesbrough and Stoke, by comparison, have made losses in excess of £50 million. So how does this line up with the supposed £39 million loss you're allowed, and why are we so much more constricted than they are?
Right. The reason for this, Alex, is actually clubs are only allowed to lose £15 million under the FFP rules, and then owners can top that up by a further 24. Now, in order to do that, you've got to have 20. Yeah, and this is all fans tend to assume that their owners quite cheerfully will hand across £24 million over each 3-year period. And some of them won't do it on principle because they feel that the club should be more sustainable. And some physically don't have it. That whilst there are many very, very wealthy owners in the Championship, that's not all of them. So with regards to Hull, in my view, Hull are probably one of the best run clubs in the Championship from a financial point of view. But that's from a financial point of view. I appreciate if you're a Hull fan, ultimately you want to see the club competing for the Championship. They are trying to do it on a longer route, in terms of player recruitment, development, getting in a young manager and so on. But it can be frustrating from a fan's point of view. I absolutely get that. Now, we've also got the fact that under the FFP rules, strictly known as profitability and sustainability these days, remember some costs are excluded: infrastructure, academy, women, community, COVID, and promotion costs. Then, with regards to the 2 clubs that you refer to, in the case of Stoke, I'm not saying they're gaming the system, because that wouldn't be appropriate. But they did have a load of player write-downs very soon after they were relegated from the Premier League. And when they did come down from the Premier League, the way that it works is that in the first season in the Championship, you're allowed 2 years' worth of Premier League losses, which are £35 million, and 1 year worth of EFL losses. So what they did was they dumped a load of costs into those early years, so that they didn't come through. So for example, in year one in the Championship, you've got 2 years of 35 million losses from the Premier League, so that's 70 plus 1 in the EFL Championship. So that allows you to lose 83. So there's a case for accelerating some of your losses. I'm not saying that I did that. And then just before the EFL clubs agreed, and this came through, I think this was on the 1st of July 2021. Was it 2020? Just before the EFL clubs agreed to not allow profits from the sale of the stadium to count towards financial fair play, by a pure coincidence, Stoke City sold the Bet365 stadium at a £33 million profit. So just so it was on the right side of the line, so it did count towards FFP. Now, you've got to find somebody willing to buy the Bet365 stadium and pay a lot of money for it. Fortunately, Bet365, the owners of Stoke City, were willing to pay that large amount of money, and therefore that allowed Stoke to book another £33 million worth of profit to offset against their FFP losses. So they were quite fortunate that somebody just happened to pop along and wanted to buy the stadium called Bet365. In the case of Borough, Borough have made £85 million worth of losses in the 3 most recent seasons. They've managed to get that down to below the 39 million limit through all of those costs I've mentioned above. There were some pretty significant COVID costs that were incurred, so that would have contributed as well. But they don't have a huge amount of wiggle room. But Steve Gibson, the owner of Middlesbrough, he has put in that additional 24. So it would be certainly of course it's in everybody's best interest to be promoted through the playoffs. But Borough won't have a lot of wiggle room this summer should they not go up.
Kieran, we've had this conversation before. When you use phrases like, I'm not saying they did that by pure coincidence and quite fortunate, these are code words that our audience have broken long ago, Kieran. This is not the Enigma code here. Our listeners know exactly what... play a write down. I've just written down Michael Elise. He's good, isn't he? But that's obviously not what player write down is. What's player write down?
Right. Let's say that, and this has occurred in the case of Stoke. Let's say that you sign a player. I think so. Was it Michael Wimmer? They signed for 20-30 million pounds, and after a season, you go, he's a bit bobbins, isn't he? And you've signed him on, let's say, for £20 million on a 4-year contract. So under normal circumstances, you'd say, right, we'll amortise the player by £5 million a year. So at the end of year one, the player's worth £15 million in the books, and you go, well, we think he's rubbish. We've tried selling him, and nobody's willing to offer us more than, let's say, £6 million for him. So he's in the books at 15 million. Nobody's willing to offer you more than 6. So therefore, you're allowed to put through a write down of 9 million. I has to be honest. There is scope for massage and manipulation when it comes to these numbers, and when we discuss this in one of the other questions a little bit later, because what is a player worth? It's a player's a unique asset. It's a bit like buying a Banksy. It's a bit like buying an Andy Warhol painting or something of that nature. That there's no definitive market price. So this is where clubs can have a bit of fun and games in terms of accelerating some of their costs into those years where they've got a bit of headroom from an FFP point of view. Not, of course, that I'm accusing Stoke City of doing this.
That's another of your code words, Kieran, when you say not accusing. Alan Hemphill, has our next question. And Alan, like you and I, Kieran, can't get his head around something. Except Alan's implying there's only one thing he can't get his head around, whereas the whole of modern life is what we're struggling with. But Alan says, something I can't get my head around is buying players but leaving them at their club on loan. Take Saliba at Arsenal, for example. Before he started playing regularly this season, he spent 3 years on loan in France. I understand the gamble of buying an 18, 19-year-old for 20 million instead of waiting and possibly buying the same player 3 years later for 35 million. But is there more of a hidden gain to this that is not evident to people like me that we're not seeing? It seems more common for bigger clubs to buy players than leave them at their current club. So how are the costs amortised in these scenarios, and what are the gains and benefits?
Okay, if we start off with the financial issue, and then we'll perhaps look at it from more of a football perspective, there are no amortisation benefits. You sign that player at the age of 18 on a £20 million deal, and let's say it's a 5-year deal, it's £4 million a year amortisation, regardless of whether the player then subsequently goes out on loan or not. What are the advantages? Well, clubs these days are far more strategic in terms of the way that they organise themselves. So you might be signing that 18-year-old with a viewpoint that he's probably not going to be able to get into the first team now, but our centre-half is 31, and in 2 years' time, that centre-half is going to be 33, and we're looking to replace him. So therefore, you sign the 18-year-old now with a view to bringing him into the first team squad in a couple of years' time. So it's part of overall strategy and planning. Some clubs are better than that of others. It could be that you've got squad size issues, although when the players are 18, normally under 23-year-old players, I don't think they count to the same extent in terms of your squad size. It could be that you're Watford. And that's one of my code words as well. And I think I've covered this story so many times, I'll say no more than that.
I think it's your safe word as well now, Kieran, isn't it?
Thursday nights. Also, from the point of view of player development, if you like the culture of the club that you're buying from, then you might say, well, actually, we don't think he's ready for the first team yet. We also don't feel that he's ready for a geographical shift. So we give him a few months to acclimatise, and sometimes that works out for everybody. I mean, if you think about Wilf Zaha, you sold him to Manchester United and immediately went back on loan to Palace for the rest of the season, and that led to the night of shame. Of course, which again, Brighton fans know that that's a code word as well. But going back to sort of financial point of view, I think Alex is absolutely right. Alan is absolutely right in that if the player does develop, then you are saving yourself 15 or 20 million pounds in 2 years' time when the player's a lot better. So that can be, but also, players are elite athletes. There is competition for their services. And the big fear is that if you are Arsenal, if you are Chelsea, if you are Manchester United, or whoever the club is going to be, if you don't sign the player because you want to see him develop, he could go to one of your rivals, and then the chances of being able to extract that player from Chelsea to Manchester United becomes far more difficult, because not only is there going to be potentially a higher fee, it could be that the player doesn't actually want to move because they're already at an elite club. So sometimes it's a case of getting ahead of the competition. So there's a variety of reasons. I mean, Alan makes reference to the bigger clubs doing this more often. The jaundiced part of me says, sadly, many clubs see football players as commodities rather than as young men. And therefore they just look at them as a trading asset point of view. And sometimes it's a bit of a gamble and it just never comes off. So if going back to the club I support, Brighton, we signed a centre-half called Matt Clark on a 4-year deal. He then spent 1 year on loan at West Brom and 2 years on loan at Derby, and we sold him at the end of 3 years, having never played a game for the club. Because the bigger clubs, the Premier League clubs in particular, tend to have loan managers, and what they are doing is that they are constantly monitoring the player. They're in contact with the player. They're in contact with the coaches at the club at which he's at. And if there's any loan managers watching this, and I know we've had one on the show before, who wants to sort of explain in more depth, we'd love to have a chat with you just to look at it from both the development and from the club's financial perspective.
I'll have a word with Mark Bright. He does loan managing at Palace.
Cool.
Yeah, it won't be a cheery word, but we'll get him on. I'd actually, you mentioned the words night of shame. I'd actually started going through my Rolodex of nights of shame until I realised you were talking about football and the playoff semi-final. Apologies, by the way, to people if I do sound a bit frog in the throaty today. Normally, that would be because of shouting at football yesterday, but we were such comfortable winners. I didn't have to do any shouting. All the shouting, I'm afraid, was done at the TV last night. And it turns out that shouting with a mouthful of popcorn does bad things to your throat. Actually, at one stage, Ali said I was like a machine gun. It's like popcorn bullets hitting the screen. Well, stop giving 12 points to Sweden. Rodri Roland has a very interesting question, Kieran, specifically about a topic that we've talked about a lot recently and is becoming, I think, an obsession with some of our listeners. And Rodri says there's been a lot of talk about the Saturday 3:00 blackout recently, which made me wonder how the typical match day income of a Saturday 3 p.m. game for a League One or League Two club compares to the income generated by a game that falls outside the blackout. Is there a big enough difference to cause the blackout to remain in place? Which I think is an interesting point of detail about this subject, Kieran.
Yes. And under the new EFL deal, which is commencing in 2024, the 3 p.m. blackout is going to remain.
Yeah.
In terms of the research has been done, and it's a wee bit hit and miss. What we have seen is that for clubs in the EFL, if they are playing a match midweek as opposed to 3 p.m. on a Saturday, attendances were around about 4.5% lower. But that also has to be viewed in the context is that the EFL attendances are pretty, they're very buoyant at present. People are getting it. First of all, it's a great product, and secondly, we've had this mantra: football's the most important of the unimportant things in life. And actually, when times are tough, it's sort of the one thing which you have got to look forward to in life, which is quite a struggle for many of us. So therefore, people are saying, well, perhaps I won't go out for a meal, or perhaps I'll cut back a bit on this, that, or the other. But I really want to go to the football because it's a chance to see the friends, it's a chance to create and share memories and so on. But also, there was, when iFollow was introduced a few years ago, it was noticed that midweek attendances were down 8.8%. So that is quite significant. Right. So I think there was a fear that should matches be available for streaming at 3 p.m., there would have been a negative impact, which would more than offset the additional revenues generated through iFollow. So it is a tricky one. I think the EFL have done their sums. By all accounts, the clubs who voted on the new deal voted it through unanimously. So I think there's and we discussed it in more depth on last Thursday's show. But certainly there is an attendance impact, and I'd always say it's a bit like Eurovision last night, or perhaps going to Glastonbury. It's far more fun to be there than watch it on telly, especially from a popcorn machine gun perspective.
Yeah, I disagree with you on Glastonbury, Kieran. I'll happily watch it on telly because I've got a toilet in my house. Actually, going there doing comedy in front of 5,000 hippies. That's a sweeping generalisation, I understand. But Simon Dorset, almost. If only Glastonbury was in Dorset, yes. That would have been a fantastic link. Simon Dorset has our next question. Simon's a QPR fan. Better luck next season, Simon. It wasn't good this year, was it? Simon says the slogan 20 is plenty is often bandied around when fans are discussing ticket prices. And I know it was a slogan for the FSA, I think, for a while. And Simon says, I know ticket prices include VAT and a levy to the Football League. And ticket revenue is far more important outside the Premier League. But what other costs are there? And how much revenue would a club actually make from a £20 ticket, which is something we very rarely discuss. I mean, I still think £30, I've got my ticket for Fulham, £30 at our age strikes me as a lot of money to watch a football match, Kieran, even now. And I think £20 is probably reasonable for a football game. But what we never discuss is how much money the club would make if tickets were capped at that price.
Yes. So if we take a look at a £20 ticket, Ms. Simon's absolutely right to first of all say, well, you've got VAT, which is £2,120. So the VAT element is £3.33. Then there is the EFL levy on matchday ticket sales. The EFL levy is 3%. So that's a further 50 pence. So that means that clubs receive effectively a net £16.17 from a £20 ticket. And then we are operating in technological times. The chances, most grounds are moving towards a cash-free existence from an operational point of view, from a security point of view, from stopping the owner of the club demanding the contents of the safe point of view. All of these things help. I'm not saying that the latter's ever occurred, of course, and I certainly won't go into the reasons on air as to why he needed the money so urgently. But the other people that take the money, it tends to be the people that are operating the systems. Some clubs have relationships with Ticketmaster and other ticketing organisations. And I've got a big shout out here for Robert Smith of The Cure. Not only is a man who I've got a huge man crush on all my life because he's a god, but he's exposed, he's shouted down the absolute scumbags who are Ticketmaster. The amount that they charge is obscene for what they actually do. Yeah. And I went on to I've just got a ticket because I'm doing a bit of teaching in the States in the summer. So I'm going to the Premier League Summer Series. So for I've got myself a $60 ticket. The Baroness doesn't know this yet. She thinks I'm just teaching. Why are you spending? You don't normally spend that much time in you. Oh well, yeah, I'm in demand. So I'm nipping across to Philly to see Chelsea play Brighton. And for a $60 ticket, Ticketmaster have charged me $23.35 in God knows what. Wow. In terms of booking fee, ticket download fee. Yeah, for the privilege of me downloading a ticket onto my iPhone, they are charging me money.
Yeah.
So but for your £20 ticket, whoever is involved in the system, and yes, I don't deny that these people have costs. But what tends to be the case is that you absorb those costs at the club. You quota £35, whereas if you're booking for to see an entertainer, it's £35 plus the fees on top. So I would imagine that the club's probably getting somewhere in the region of £15 from a £20 ticket.
It's Palace, as Palace often do. Make announcements and then are slightly astounded when people are not happy about them. And they announced recently that they've got a partnership. It's always a partnership, isn't it? Mm-hmm. With Ticketmaster from next season. And then were astonished that everyone went, what? It's going to cost us even more money, and had to make all these promises that it wouldn't. They're not a popular brand, are they? Robert Smith,
absolutely horrible.
They are horrible, and Robert Smith is right. And I'm glad he put his foot down and made that stand. All I'll say about Robert Smith is every now and again, why can't he just paint a smile on his face? He puts that big lipstick on. He
brings smiles to everyone.
He brings upside down frowns, Kieran, which as we know is very different to a smile. This is what baffles me. I've said this before. You talk about taking the VAT element off a £20 ticket. But the club gets the VAT back eventually, don't they?
The club is responsible for handing over the VAT, but the club at the same time, when the club buys something, it is allowed to deduct the VAT on the things that it buys from the VAT on the things that it sells, so It pays across the net amount.
Right. Okay. I simply can't get my head around. I'd love to meet the person who invented. I don't know. Does somebody invent a tax? But it just baffles me. This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Manscaped. With summer approaching fast, Manscaped is here to ensure your body is ready for the wild with their game-changing grooming and hygiene products. Don't be the guy at the beach with Austin Powers chest hair. It's time to get ready for summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL.
Manscaped is dedicated to helping increase your confidence and level up your full body grooming game with the Performance Package 4.0. The kit comes with the essential Lawnmower 4.0 waterproof, cordless body trimmer and a ton of other liquid formulations to turn around your grooming routine. Whether you're trimming your chest or the treasure chest in your pants, this is the best trimmer on the market. It features a ceramic blade designed to cut hair on loose skin and to reduce grooming accidents, thanks to its advanced skin-safe technology. Having the right tools for grooming is essential. Do yourself a favour and always use the right tools for the job.
So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. The next question comes from Paul Salvin, Kieran. And we have Neil Doncaster, the head honcho of Scottish football, joining us soon. So this is something I think I will put to him as well if it turns out that Paul Salvin's information is correct. Because Paul says, I'm sure I read somewhere that despite English and Scottish teams qualifying for the Champions League from separate countries, the TV deal is all under one UK contract. If this is the case, how will English teams be affected by two Scottish teams qualifying for the group stages this season? And how does the TV deal break down for each club?
Okay. The way that UEFA distributes its prize money is that it has four pots. The first pot is what's referred to as the starting fee. So if you qualify for the Champions League, you get around about 15 or 16 million euros regardless. And that's before your ticket sales, that's before any bonuses from sponsors and so on. So a quarter of it goes to the participants. Then 30% is allocated on how you do in the competition. So it works out as around about 2.8 million euro for a win in the group stages and just over 900,000 for a draw. And if you then qualify for the knockout phase, again, that's graded. 30% is allocated on coefficients, a 10-year coefficient, and that's there. I'm not saying that it's there to protect the cartel who are in favour of the Super League, but it's there to protect the cartel who are in favour of the Super League. And the reason for this is let's say that Barcelona or Real Madrid, or whoever it is going to be, they have an absolutely dreadful year in the Champions League and they get knocked out at the group stage. Well, this is to protect them. So it's a parachute payment called something else. And what happens is that each of the 32 teams in the Champions League, and this will be extended to 36 from 24-25, is graded on the basis of their participation in the Champions League over the last 32 years. And the club at the top, I think it works out as about €1 million per position. So the Real Madrid, because they've won the Champions League 5 times in the last 10 years, and it has to be said, as much as I loathe Real Madrid, they are absolutely brilliant in this competition. You've got to give them props for that. So they will get 32 million, and the side at the bottom, and I think the side at the bottom this season was possibly Glasgow Rangers because they've not been in that European competition for a while. They would I think the second or the first lowest, so they'd have got 1 or 2 million. And then we come to the area which I think is Paul specifically referring to, and this is known as the market pool, but only 15% of the money is allocated on the market pool. Now, the market pool says if you are Spanish TV, German TV, British TV, and you are paying more money to UEFA, then the clubs under your jurisdiction are entitled to take more money out. And therefore we get this complication because clearly BT Sport pay more for Champions League rights than any other broadcaster. And therefore British clubs take more money out than any other individual nation. My understanding, and these figures aren't precise, is that 90% of that money goes to the clubs in England and 10% goes to the clubs in Scotland. Based on sort of the justification is if you take a look at the relative sizes of the population of England and Scotland, it's around about sort of 9 or 10 to 1. And there's various algorithms that go into it. But as far as Scotland is concerned, the way that the market pool is allocated between the two clubs, part of which is based on how they perform. But if you win the Scottish Premiership, you get 55%. And if you are second in the Premiership, you get 45% of the Scottish pool, which is allocated on a positional basis. So it's spreadsheet heaven for people who enjoy that type of activity.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Liam Kirk. And when I've asked the question, I'll explain something to Liam, which I think he'll be pleased to hear about. Liam Kirk says, as someone who follows both the UK and US versions of football, a growing trend within the US game is to include voidable years in a player's contract. These voidable years are effectively considered to be dummy seasons added to the end of the contract in order to reduce the impact of signing bonuses against a salary cap for each of the contracted seasons. With amortisation being such a popular topic on the podcast, could you foresee the use of voidable years within a contract creeping into the game with the intention of reducing the annual amortisation charge associated with player purchases? Now, Liam, you may be interested to know, on our 2.5-hour journey back from Leicester the other night, Kieran and I pretty much put the world to rights.
We did.
We spoke about a wide range of topics. Kieran was really interesting and passionate about education, and we talked about all sorts of things. Rishi Sunak's ears would have been burning. But the subject, this question was in my head, and there was a context in which I said to Kieran, we've got a question about that coming up on Sunday. And Kieran said, well, don't ask me that now because it will spoil the surprise on Sunday. But also, I couldn't ask him because I couldn't for the life of me remember the phrase voidable years. So I was going, I said, it's about contracts, Kieran. It's America. Something happens every 365 days. Oh, God. So that took us 2 junctions on the M1. But anyway, voidable years, Kieran. It's an interesting question. Do you know the answer?
Yeah, I took a look at this, and it's an intriguing way of having fun and games, and again, not manipulating the numbers. But what happens in US franchise sports? There is a pretty strict salary cap. So let's say that you've agreed to pay a player a £20 million bonus or $20 million bonus, and the player signed a 3-year contract. So that works out as $6.67 million a year. And you go, well, if we pay him the bonus on top of the base salary, that's going to go above our wage cap. So what we'll do is we will say we will pay the bonus over 5 years. So now we've got $20 million over 5 years, and we say to the player, look, we ain't going to be employing you in years 4 or 5, but what we will be able to do is we say, well, the bonus is $20 million. We're going to spread that over 5 years. It's only $4 million a year. And then when it gets to year 3, you go, yeah, okay, we're fessing up now. The player's going to go. But what it's done, it's given you a couple of years with a lower contribution towards your wage cap, and what you're doing is you're pushing a problem down the road, because in year 3 you've now got a problem. In year 3 you've now got to go and put 3 of that 5 years bonus against your wage cap. But hopefully either the wage cap has risen, or you've made savings elsewhere, or you managed to trade the player to go elsewhere, and that bonus, but to a certain extent, goes with him. So it's fascinating if you like that type of thing, and I suspect I'm in the 0.01% of people that go, blimey, that's quite clever. That could that operate here in the UK? I think it would not be allowed because the rules for player registration are very much set in stone by FIFA and the individual governing bodies, and there's no way that a player would agree to have a contract which gives them 3 years worth of wages and 2 years at the end of it where they might or might not get a bonus. It simply wouldn't be acceptable to the authorities, because I think they'd see it as gaming the system to an extent, even that they're not prepared to go along with. And I don't think that players and their representatives would want it, because sadly we are operating in a world in which clubs are not always paying wages and costs on time and pushing a problem down a road. And we have seen issues to do with players, and Barcelona come to mind, where they've deferred wages, and then those deferrals they've tried to defer again. I think there's a breakdown in trust now between players and clubs, and I don't think that FIFA or UEFA or the Premier League, etc., would allow it anyway.
Yeah, I'm quite glad I didn't ask you that question now on the M1. You would have been taking your hands off the wheel and gesticulating all sorts.
Doing the full Magnus Pike.
Exactly. And there's one for the kids.
Yes.
He was a popular scientist, everybody, back in the day. But was that Finley going in or coming out?
Finley was coming in. He heard the word amortisation, and his ears prick up.
How's his squeaky toy?
Well, we've lost his squeaky armadillo. We don't know what he's done with it.
Oh my!
So yeah, he's got a bit of a sad face.
Oh well, you just need pace around the house, surely, and you'll get a squeak from somewhere, wouldn't you?
Yes,
it's amazing.
Like a divining rod.
We had it was lovely. Our audience in Derby the other night, in Leicester, rather, beg your pardon, were absolutely lovely.
Oh, great, weren't they?
But at least 75 of them were just, is Finley here?
Yes.
No, he's not. Oh, okay. I swear 2 people left.
Yes.
About 18 people left because the Baroness wasn't there. The reason I say Derby is because our next question is about Derby, indirectly. I'm almost reluctant to ask it, Kieran, because it means that you put Derby County down in the list of topics for tomorrow and the poor sods panic again.
That's right, and also Samaritans in the East Midlands, their phones start ringing as soon as I put up the show notes before we put the show out. Yeah, it's.
I genuinely didn't know what to do, Kieran, the other night. All those Leicester City fans had so many questions about their club going down, and I mean, God love you. I think you do genuinely care about other clubs going down, Kieran. When I just have to put the smile on and go, yeah, I really hope you do well. As long as Palace don't go down, I don't give a toss. But that's not the sort of thing you can say as the host of a live show when surrounded by Leicester City fans and 2 Brighton fans. I don't know how you do it, Kieran. Do you book Brighton fans to turn up wherever we go, just to sit down the front?
We're fans from all over. We're from Rotherham and Sheffield United.
Yes, we did. Celtic as well.
Celtic, yes.
The nice young man for Celtic asked a really interesting accountancy question, which you really liked. We had some cracking questions. I do like the fact that both the Brighton fans were quite posh, and one of them was called Charles.
You've got a friend called Julian.
We both got. Oh, that's a fair point. Yeah. So I was trying to think of a pithy comeback then, Kieran, but you're quite right. You've pulled the rug from under my feet. Julian, no, it's not a proper working class name, is it? Also, our Julian is not a proper working class bloke either, is it? So Lawrence has hi Julian. Lawrence has a question about Derby County indirectly. Lawrence says, during one of your many discussions about, could this be Lawrence Bassini, do you think, Kieran?
Could be.
Could be. He needs to learn these things. Lawrence says, during one of your many discussions about Derby County, you said they decided not to amortise their players evenly to save on cost in early years. In football club accounts, is there any evidence of clubs doing the opposite, i.e. accelerating the amortisation in years where they have scope under the FFP rules in order to save them the costs in future years? I guess the fact the calculation is spread over 3 years mitigates this a bit, but there can sometimes be justification in accounting and writing down a player's value more than the straight book value if you think the player may be worth even less. I'm glad I asked you now what writing down means, Kieran.
Yes. Well, you can. You cannot have creative amortization as such, and especially the EFL have introduced rules, and personally, I don't think they have to do that. I think the accounting rules are quite certain here. But the EFL actually have a specific rule introduced now that you have to use straight line amortization. But what you can do is you can use this writing down approach, which we refer to as impairment, as a way of accelerating your amortization costs without specifically calling it accelerating your amortization costs. And this is of benefit for those clubs who are being relegated. So if we take a look at Aston Villa in 2016, when the club was relegated from the Premier League, they had a bit of headroom with regards to their FFP calculations. So by a pure coincidence, they wrote down the value of their squad by £35 million. And the advantage that gives is that if you accelerate your amortization cost through this write down, it reduces the value of the pool of players, and therefore it reduces your future amortization fee when you are in the Championship. And remember, in the Premier League, you're allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years. So therefore, it makes sense to accelerate your costs in the Premier League, and it decelerates them in the Championship when your FFP loss is that much lower. So creative accounting, possibly. But Lawrence is exactly right that you can have a bit of fun and games with the numbers, and some clubs do that to a greater extent than others.
Kieran, I'm slightly spooked by our penultimate question. The reason being, you will remember on the last pod, I think it was, we jokingly talked about players being sold in a kind of horse-type auction in Tipperary.
Yes.
And this next question is not only about players being auctioned, it comes from Clive Steed. That's spooky, Kieran, isn't it?
Whoa, yeah.
Or a massive coincidence, like most spooky stories. But what a cracking name as well, Clive Steed. I mean, John Steed from the Avengers is the coolest man ever.
Absolutely.
In any fiction or literature. John Steed, adore that man. If only I could wear a bowler hat like he did. But Clive Steed says basically, are players ever auctioned? Assuming they had a valid third-party medical and agreed on a minimum wage, surely this could be a good way to get the highest price. It would also be very entertaining and would give those pointless transfer programs a bit more to talk about.
Yes, this is not dissimilar to the draft that we have in US franchise sports, where college players are picked, and it's not an auction as such, but it's certainly it's become a big event in the NFL calendar, in the NBA calendar, and so on. I think we have a slightly more complex situation here, in that quite often, if you are trying to sign a player, you will be spending 4 or 5 months trying to agree that the small print of the deal. So, yes, it makes sense if the player is a medical in advance. Agreeing a minimum wage. Some players and some representatives are looking for the maximum wage, and therefore they would advise their clients to go to follow the money. I think players are auctioned. The better players, except it's effectively done through the media. We've got an auction of Manchester United at present, except it's being done through a series of sealed bids, and then going back for more and more. But to have a formal auction of players, it could be agreed. The seller would have to agree to a minimum price. You could have the buyers. I think the player would perhaps want, and here I would feel quite protective towards players. It could be that the player doesn't want to move for family reasons to too far where they currently live, or for cultural reasons and so ever. So in order to protect the player to a greater extent, I would feel slightly uneasy, and also I don't like the idea of human beings being bought and sold as commodities at the best of times, and this for me has got slightly uneasy connotations.
Yeah, see, if you don't like the idea, none of us really like the idea, Kieran, of human beings, football players being bought and sold. So you won't like my suggestion that once they're bought at an auction, they should be branded as well. You just put a hot iron with CPFC on them, so you know it belongs to you. The agent would like that.
No, I
No.
don't like that at all. No.
I can tell, but you're silent. I can tell you're glowering at the screen now, Kieran. Our last question comes from Dave Anchors. Dave says, watching live Premier League games on TV this season, I realised that the use of club badges on screen rather than a three-letter abbreviation to show which sides are playing is limited to Sky. This got me wondering why it had been done. If the intention was to make it easier for viewers, then I think it's misguided, as many viewers may struggle to recognise club badges. For example, my wife has been watching football for nearly 50 years, but doesn't recognise many beyond her own club, especially those overseas. Of course, it could just be the result of some marketing types wanting to justify their existence by refreshing the presentation. Alternatively, could it be that it's justification for extra payments to the clubs for their intellectual property?
I don't think it's extra payments for their intellectual property, but I think the clubs are quite keen to extend their brand. And Manchester City don't like being referred to as MCI.
Yeah.
So, right, and also, a lot of these, especially when they use these three letter abbreviations, it's not particularly intuitive a lot of the time. I sometimes look at them and go, what on earth? Okay. What on earth is it? So by linking the badge that you're seeing on the pitch to the badge in the presentation in the top corner, it is simply a much broader issue in terms of brand recognition and brand extension, and it is being done from an intellectual property point of view. But I think as a fan, let's face it, Kevin. When we were collecting our shoot tables back in the day, we knew every badge of every club, whether it was Alloa or Manchester United. Yeah. We knew them off by heart, and I think it should be part of the national curriculum. Personally.
Oh right, so you're blaming Mrs. Anchors here for not being able to recognise the badge. Is that right? Shame.
Well, maybe I think the country's been going to hell in a handcart for many years. This is one way of trying to reverse that.
We had this conversation. I mean, as a kid, I learnt about geography and social history from club badges and club nicknames. It's it's always quite galling for me as a Palace fan if you're watching a live game on TV and you're 4-0 down after 20 minutes. And we're referred to as cry.
Yes.
So it's just like, can we not change that to something else? But it's quite interesting because every now and again we'll be watching a game and Ali will just go, what team is that meant to represent? Because they, as you say, they're not always intuitive, are they, these things? But it's a very good question, Dave. Thank you, and give our regards to Mrs. Anchors. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that would be very kind of you. Please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com and we will get to that question as soon as we possibly can. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks as always for everybody from Patreon. And we are having our end of season quiz in just under 3 weeks for patrons, as a way of saying thank you. And if you're doing nothing on a Friday night and you want to be entertained by two slightly bewildered middle-aged men, then you'll be saying, I'm so glad I'm a Patreon of the Price of Football. But there's another way in which you can support the club, support the show, as well as the live shows. And we're coming to Plymouth next week, and we were delighted. The reason we were planning on doing 90 minutes at Leicester, but we said, because producer Guy wasn't there to manage us, we will answer every single question, and we quite cheerfully. And then we go, Jesus Christ, we started at 7:30. It's 10:30 and we're still going.
I know. And we got to talk about football as well, which he would have been really cross about. There's quite a few conversations. Didn't have any hint of football finance in them, Kieran. Wasn't it? It was great, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. we're like kids, weren't we? Very, very, very disgraceful. But there's another way of supporting the show, and that's to give us a review using your app. Feel free to say whatever you choose. You could even say you would rather have the show presented by Penfold from Danger Mouse and Magnus Pike. And I think that would be a very intellectual show and very, very physical as well.
Yeah, Penfold would have to hold his face really close to the screen, though, wouldn't he? So
Yes.
he wouldn't be able to see it from where I'm sitting, for example. Google both of them, kids. Penfold was a great character, wasn't he?
He was.
Poor old Danger Mouse used to treat him abominably, I think. What a way to end the show, Kieran. Reminiscing
Bye
about...
BAFTA.
Oh, they've long gone, Kieran.
Yes.
How did they close the show this week? By getting cross about... They started by being cross about Eurovision, and they ended by being cross about the way Danger Mouse treated his sidekick. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.